I'm so excited to talk about today's topic. This is a question we get very, very often from caseworkers, because I think there is such a range for how offices handle. How do you talk about casework? Casework is featured on every member's website. Every member does casework, but I think the appetite and the kind of comfort level and processes for how do you talk about that? How does casework feature in your members' public outreach, in their public persona, and the stories you're telling in the district or state varies widely between different members. I think talking about comms, there's sometimes a little bit of trepidation for caseworkers. I know I certainly felt this. Had constituents threaten to go to the media on tough cases or seen a flood of casework come in when my boss made an appearance on the news. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how comms doesn't have to be scary, how comms, in fact, smart collaboration with your comms team can help streamline some casework, make sure you're reaching folks with appropriate casework inquiries, and help build awareness on your team and in your state and districts about your team's successes and the resources that your team needs to be successful. And today we are delighted to be joined by a true expert and innovator on casework and comms, Zack Brown. Zack's career on the Hill started with an internship with Rep. Mario Diaz-Balart, and most recently concluded serving as the late Rep. Don Young's comms director until the Congressman's passing in 2022. Zack has been an outspoken advocate for constituent services his entire career and has worked with offices on both sides of the aisle to improve the constituent experience. And I will say that his newsletter, The Delegation, which covers Alaska politics with a focus on its 3 members of Congress, is one of my favorite newsletters out there. And I am a newsletter person. I love them. It is such a joy to read. I wish there was one for my state and every other state out there. So Zack, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks so much, Anne. It's so good to be with you.
Awesome. And then I'm also joined by my friend and colleague at the POPVOX Foundation, Katherine Long. You all know Katherine from her previous appearances on these webinars, but she is a veteran casework manager and most recently of the Office of Senator Patrick Leahy. Katherine, thanks again for being here.
Great to be here again, Anne. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and I'm so excited to have both of us for this conversation again, because like we said, the comms needs appetites between offices vary so widely. And as always, it's wonderful to have House and Senate representation. So today we'll tag team this discussion a little bit. So to kick us off, Zack, comms and casework worked hand in glove in the Young office. Can you tell us how did that work? What was your relationship like with your casework team?
Sure. I think one of the most critical central components to the casework success story from Congressman Young's office was the passion at the top. The Congressman was passionate about constituent services. Anytime he'd be interviewed and would be asked what his favorite part of the job over nearly 50 years of serving in the House was, it wasn't a piece of legislation. It wasn't any sort of, executive agency action that he helped spur. It was always casework. It was truly the bread and butter of what he wanted our office to be. Insofar as the House is supposed to be a representative body of the American people, we all know every day the inconveniences that we experience just in life, and so many people are experiencing those with federal government agencies or it may be outside of the purview of congressional caseworkers, but government agencies at the state and local level as well. And there are just so many simple actions you can take to improve the casework experience for everybody. And sort of the guiding light, the mission behind what we did as an office in terms of casework was to always be, to start as a listening ear and to really understand what the constituent was experiencing, to learn about the historical events that might have happened prior to this constituent coming to you, their interactions with federal agencies. Listening is so important, and it's the first step that really kind of shakes the importance of casework into you, because we working on the Hill in Congress, in district offices, being a congressional staffer is so much, autopilot sometimes. We're funding the government every year, and, we're doing the NDAA every year, and we want to just find the quickest way from point A to point B. But casework doesn't work like that. Casework isn't, written by, lawyers who know the ins and outs of legislation. Casework is just the real everyday experience of the folks that you're representing. And so as long as they're your guiding principle and finding solutions for them, it really helps tie the whole casework operation together. And it was an all hands on deck thing. It wasn't just our caseworkers and our state director. Of course, we were an at-large district, so we didn't have a district director. He was called the state director. and our chief of staff, it was everybody. It was our legislative team staying engaged as new legislation was coming down the pipe that might have newly authorized or funded programs, or programs that may be changed in terms of what constituents would be eligible for. And it was always monitoring those things, keeping them front and center for the rest of the team, that helped kind of give us an idea of where we would go next. And that's when, comms and the casework and the sort of executive management team and Congressman Young himself, it was an all hands on deck situation, because when you think about it, for every one constituent that you're providing casework services to, they may not be willing to do some sort of public testimonial. It could be a little dicey in that regard. Everybody has a different comfort level with speaking of experiences. And, in so many of these casework situations, it's very sensitive situations, medical data, retirement income, stuff like that. But for every constituent that maybe won't do a testimonial, they're still telling their friends, their family, who tell their friends and their family. And so on one end, it's the whole purpose of a congressional office from a casework standpoint. But on the other end, it really helps tell your members' story. It helps keep them front and center and their mission, and it keeps their name intertwined, so that it's not just a political thing that gets them political points. It really does help spread the word. If the word casework can be attached to your member's last name, not just legislative accomplishments and political slogans, if you can attach the word casework to their last name, that becomes part of the brand, and that becomes one of the most important functions of your office.
Zack, that's such a good point. And I love the point that constituents telling their friends and telling their family and their neighbors about the services that they receive. That's comms. It's all under the angle. It's not just what are you putting on social media. It's what are you giving people to be able to talk about in the community. Absolutely.
I agree. That's an incredible overview, and you can tell the enthusiasm you're bringing to this, and that Congressman Young as well brought to that. So it sounds like with the whole office, whole team involved in doing casework, you had some built-in backup for your caseworkers. But I'm curious if we could dig a little bit deeper into how your office managed that balance, where folks are aware that you're able to provide that service, but your casework team may have some limited capacity, and particularly around we all went through the pandemic, various issues, repatriation, stimulus payments, those kinds of spikes in demand. Did you have any partnership and strategies that you worked with your casework team on?
Sure. I think one of the most important things that we did as an office is to stay in close contact with our Senate counterparts, because we don't want to be doubling efforts here. And certainly constituents are coming to us with situations that may be very difficult to navigate. And we also don't want to overload the constituent with, double or triple outreach just because there's overlapping workloads here. Great point on just the bandwidth of the caseworking team. I think it's so important to work with your team to set proper expectations with a constituent, and that includes in your messaging. It includes taking a look at the entire calendar year and figuring out, when you want to do something like mobile office hours. When will it work in terms of staffing? Is it overlapping with perhaps, Anne, you said at the very top, summer passport season? You have to kind of build into your annual calendar what times may be most busy, or when the workloads are going to be most overwhelming. Obviously, we can't predict everything. The pandemic, so dozens and dozens of new aid programs were created that we had to learn about on the fly and identify eligibility requirements and do the legwork before we did any messaging. And you can't predict those things, but it's all about striking the balance between expectations, between planning ahead when it makes sense, not doubling efforts unnecessarily by tackling things maybe your Senate counterparts already have. And really, we all have our own portfolio, if you will. Legislative staffers have literal legislative portfolios. Comms people handle comms, caseworkers do casework. But again, it to some degree will eventually and can become an all hands on deck sort of, and other duties as assigned part of your job description. I think, you know, we always have to be willing to help out the district team. And that means, you know, maybe meeting twice a month just to get a sense of the workload. I think there's, for understandable reasons, geography mainly, there has always been a little bit of a line, a bit of a disconnect between district and DC offices. And it just adds so much. It's all the time, you know, when we talk about congressional management, we talk about keeping the relationship between district and DC strong. And this is just part of it. And you know, understanding workloads and prioritizing work or individual employees where they're needed most. It's just, it all kind of comes together better when your lines of communication are open.
Absolutely. That's terrific. And I love the point about collaborating with your Senate colleagues. We're in Vermont, we had a similar situation, 3 members. And at one point during the repatriation, we had an email going around where we would check off, you know, who had which constituent, so that we could all work really efficiently together. I imagine that might extend as well to delegation press releases and that kind of collaboration as well.
Absolutely. You know, just keeping an email chain going, especially in times of great national strife where there are just events happening left and right and it feels like the news cycle's not ending. Those are the times where you're going to really find value in keeping communication open.
That's awesome. And I think many offices have certainly learned that the hard way in the last few months
Yes.
and years, for sure. You mentioned and I'm really fascinated by this and how this worked with your district and your DC teams, that about the idea of sending out proactive information for constituents as programs are changing, as your legislative team might have more insight into something that's changing and then can kind of push that to your caseworkers and then push that out to constituents. Can you just talk about the mechanics for how that worked? You've mentioned twice a month meetings. Is that something that, you know, your leg team or you initiated or your caseworkers initiated? What was the process there?
I think particularly in offices with long institutional memories, like Mr. Young or Mr. Leahy's office, different management styles and different collaborative styles just are, they change over the years. And I think when I came on, maybe the meetings weren't happening as much, but I think anytime there's staff turnover, either in the district, DC, or both, it's a great time to recalibrate that working relationship and figure out what, you know, is going to work best communication wise. You have to learn your coworkers and you have to learn how to work with your coworkers. And, you know, Alaska is 4,000 miles away. It's even more important for us. Hawaii, you know, the territories, you have to keep communication open. You have to work closely together. These are the people who are on the ground. They're the ones who, when the member themselves are going to events, and you know, maybe they're overloaded with constituents, they're the next line of defense for getting feedback from constituents, hearing what they're talking about, and relaying that to the staff. And identifying proactive messaging opportunities is important. Number one, to tell the story and from a political and accomplishment perspective, but it's also an opportunity to spread the word of other services that your office can provide. A great example of this would be the bipartisan infrastructure bill from fall 2021. We had been tracking it, of course. Mr. Young had gone to the White House, and we knew what was in the bill and the new grant programs and the whole 9 yards. We had a really on it legislative team who was just ready to roll this thing out. And ahead of final passage, I wanted to make sure that we were messaging this in an exciting way, but in a welcoming way. It wasn't just about infrastructure. It was about getting that constituent involved in Congressman Young's entire flywheel of constituent services, the newsletter, finding out his voting record, just all of that, just the fundamentals of democracy, I suppose. And so we asked constituents what they were most looking forward to from the infrastructure bill, so that the moment it passed and we knew it was going to the president, that email hit their inboxes and they could vote in a poll to say, you know, roads, bridges, rail, the whole 9 yards of infrastructure. But there was also another paragraph inviting them to just share their thoughts on anything, to share their concerns. There was a sentence plugging Casework, and from an email that hits 100,000 inboxes, if you're getting, you know, 30, 40,000 people to open it, that's 30 to 40,000 new opportunities to provide something to a constituent that they might have not even known was available to them. And so it's finding opportunities to spread the word about Casework, to leverage different vehicles that might not be directly Casework related, to invite people in.
That's so cool. And I love the idea of like the flywheel for when someone comes in through Casework. That's the opportunity to kind of kickstart the relationship. It's not the case ends and it's closed, constituent leaves forever. Like, it's a chance to kind of keep that going. The other thing you said that I really just want to call out to is how that relationship between staffers changes over time. You know, I certainly, you know, we went through several comms directors when I was working on the Hill, and I heard that relationship really did change each time. And I think it's helpful to remember, maybe you have someone who isn't super excited about Casework now. That might change. There are all these opportunities to kind of reset that relationship and kick off a new way to work together.
Absolutely. Yep.
But then also, Zach, I can't let you go without talking about earmarks. Can you share a little bit about how, speaking of new opportunities to reach people and connect people in with new ways, can you share a little bit about how your team handled community project funding? Because I think it's all related.
Sure. I think probably one of the most beautiful, poetic events of Congressman Young's final year in Congress was, after a decade of not having them, he got one more round of earmarks to connect with, but also, you know, it was appropriately timed for his passing because it became a legacy thing. Earmarks, community project funding, and that's really the most important word, community, is your district may be small. It might be, you know, a few city blocks in New York City. It could be an entire state like Alaska. It's a similar amount of people, but there are so many different communities, and you really want to, nobody likes to favor, no member really likes to favor one or two portions of their district. And you know, oftentimes communities that aren't involved sort of can feel left out if the member hasn't visited in a while. Particular you know, challenge in Alaska, when there are so many very remote communities that may be accessible by snow machine or seaplane, sled dogs, rail. It's really something. But if you approach community project funding as an opportunity to highlight communities across Alaska, it can change the dynamic of the way constituents interact with you. And throughout the lead up to in the appropriations process and in the lead up to, you know, final passage and securing these earmarks, we were proactively messaging in terms of the newsletter, on our website, on social media. We did Facebook Lives where Congressman Young would talk about earmarks. And it was just an exciting way for our staff to get a really good cross-section of Alaska. But it was really cool to see people online say, hey, I haven't heard, you know, Homer, Alaska spoken about in a while. That's pretty cool. Or Kenai or Ketchikan and the North Slope, just all over the entire state. And it creates a community, more of a community feeling around the member. Then there's the direct impacts. These are helping communities. You know, they're funding infrastructure, critical infrastructure. They're helping in public health emergencies. I think that a great example of Congressman Young's earmark prowess, I suppose, it can be something small. When we think about the federal government and government funding bills and just everything that federal money touches, we tend to think of big projects, airports, the military, et cetera, just giant things with a federal animus. The food bank in Alaska requested, I think, $500,000. So in terms of federal money, a very small figure, to buy a pre-owned forklift for the food bank just to more efficiently move food. Well, this, wouldn't seem like a big deal in terms of what the federal government's spending money on. But in the community, this was a very big deal. I mean, they were stoked. They were thrilled, and they were able to expand their operations and work more efficiently and make sure that people were staying fed. And these are the sort of small victories where so often your member will have critics online who say, "Where have you been? What have you done on this specific issue? Haven't seen you in my community." This is the direct link to get involved in a community that maybe the member has been criticized before for not being involved with. It's actual receipts that the member can hold up saying, "I'm here, we're having this dialogue." It's a two-way dialogue. And you get to work with stakeholders, for example, from the food bank, and those stakeholders talk to the city council, who spread the word to the local business owners and the other private nonprofits, and the whole 9 yards. Earmarks are just a really great pathway to keep the conversation going, which is part of that congressional flywheel. Talk about earmarks, get him in the office for a DC tour, help him with Social Security checks, talk about Medicare. It's get him in at one entry point and you've got him.
I love, there's so much there to unpack. And, on the Senate side, Senator Leahy was also thrilled to have been involved in the return of earmarks and the ability of members to, support a need that's been identified in their community that might not otherwise be supported. Vermont's a small state. When you drive around, you can see quite a few projects in a day. I love the way that you talk about, people spreading the word to each other, and the impact, how the story sort of tells itself. I think in some bigger states and maybe more recently, we're seeing a lot of members putting out statistics and reports, profiling, testimonials, and that kind of thing on their website, which is obviously, especially for probably a newer office that hasn't generated the buzz, an interesting tactic. But I'm curious, when caseworkers are asked for that information, it can sometimes be a little bit tricky to figure out how to pull it together. There's also some issues around privacy and people sharing their stories. Did you use that kind of data and testimonials? And can you talk a little bit about how, what some of the strategies you used and any pitfalls you ran across in that process?
Sure. I think, and you're absolutely right, this can be a little trickier for a newer office. I think the best data that you can, the best data that exists for casework is the data that you have right in front of you, which means it is so important once a new member comes in to try as hard as you can to hit the ground running and to work with your, whichever vendor runs your constituent management software to figure out where people live, where you're getting the most calls from, are there specific issues popping up in specific areas. I think one of the more common pieces of data that congressional offices collect, because it's a very popular topic for members to discuss, is VA benefits. And so I think if you're looking at a policy set that has a casework connection, VA benefits, Medicare, Social Security, anything like that, offices should consider or have a conversation with the district team as far as caseworkers go. Maybe caseworkers have a caseworker portfolio. We had one caseworker who was just the lead point person on VA and active duty issues, one caseworker who is the point person on nutrition and nutritional programs like SNAP. And that can really help identify, when it's all said and done, that can help identify what specific issue set we're working on. And then another important piece of data, just so you can self-reflect on your own performance as an office and identify opportunities, is going to be how many cases are closed favorably versus unfavorably. And of the unfavorable ones, was it something that was within control of the office, or was maybe it something that was never going to happen because it was up to an agency anyway? And that data is really important to have so that you're just constantly reevaluating and recalibrating where necessary with your casework approach. It's also very important to, like I said earlier, pay attention to geographic regions where you're getting more phone calls, letters, emails. For example, in Alaska, not too long ago, there was a situation with the post office where there were 2 postal employees who worked there in a remote Alaska village, and one of them had left for a new job, and then the other was ill, and there was just nobody left for people to pick up important stuff like prescriptions and stimulus checks and stuff like that. And those are the things where if you don't have somebody on the ground, we had the biggest state by geography, but we still only had one state director, so he can't be everywhere. And if you're not getting if there's nothing happening on social media, which frankly in Alaska's case can simply be because there's no internet accessibility out there, these are the things that you really have to pay attention to on the phone and in the actual postal mail, which in this situation the issue was with the post office, so it would have been a little difficult. But we were able to identify, look, we had 5 contacts from this one community in one day. Something's going on, and so we were able to get that situation resolved and work with local partners to find some temporary staffing there. But that's all part of the data and keeping track of where your work is going in the district and where it's ending up, and just tracking constantly what was successful, what wasn't, and if it wasn't, why. And if you track those things, you keep it organized, you'll have a really great splash page on your members' homepage. It says, this is how many constituents you've helped this Congress, how many military issues closed out, how many people helped with Medicare benefits. And, casework, we know casework to be a good, positive thing because we've seen what it can do. Casework it can be kind of a confusing topic if you're not aware that it A, exists, B, that you can go to your representative or senator to get help with something. And so when you see very specific examples of casework success, nutrition, military, et cetera, people see, oh, I have an issue with Medicare that I've just been putting on the back burner. That's their entry point, again, into the flywheel. They see a very specific situation that applies to them, and you have that situation to message because you've collected the data behind it.
And did your office have any particular techniques for garnering testimonials? Did you do a customer satisfaction survey or constituent satisfaction survey?
Sure. I think the critical part here, because as comms people, we love to hear about positive constituent casework stories because we want to share. We want to tell the story. We want to message that. And we frankly want to get our caseworkers credit for doing a stellar job. The most important part of the whole process to getting a testimonial is the final sort of handoff between caseworker and comms person. You're emailing with a constituent, you're communicating, and then you say, and I'm adding my colleague, Zack here, who is the communications director for Congressman Young. We'd love to discuss the possibility of a testimonial. You've broached the subject, you've connected the relevant person, the caseworker's done their job, and then it's just, you can connect directly with the constituent. I do think sometimes when you mention a potential testimonial earlier on, it can cause some apprehension on the part of the constituent. So it's not best to start that conversation any sooner than you have a resolution. But certainly it all comes back to having a close working and productive collaborative relationship with your district team so that they know, the final step is to connect them with comms for the potential of, telling the story.
And that's so smart. And I think such a good point about use the people on your team for their roles. I mean, I think some caseworkers, when they're thinking about testimonials, they think, oh my gosh, and now do I have to do all of this extra work? I've finished the case, I'm done now, please let me out of this. So being able to have that relationship with your comms team to say, and now this is your job. Like, I don't have to take a no from a constituent if they don't want to give a testimonial. we can kind of keep it finish it up on a very positive note on that casework. I think that's such a smart approach.
And that resolution also helps with the whole sense of workload and team bandwidth. Knowing when you're done means you know when you can move on to the next thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then speaking of that great relationship with your comms team on individual casework stories, I know Katherine and I have certainly both had these. There are those moments when you can't get to the positive resolution. Constituent is unhappy. Constituent says, if you can't help me, I'm going to go to XYZ local paper because they have to know what this agency is doing to me. Personally, I know that was just a moment of absolute sheer and utter panic, no matter how well I thought I'd done my job. Do you have advice for caseworkers on if you think something's going to go that way, when, how to talk to your comms team?
The first thing I would tell caseworkers is none of this is your fault. Take a breath. You're going to be fine. Congressional offices employ comms teams for a reason. And at the end of the day, the member themselves is in politics with the full knowledge that people out there, some people just will never like them. That's the very first message I would give to caseworkers. If there's an indication, and this comes back to why it's so important to have a comprehensive view of the individual constituent. If there's an indication or a red flag that this may become a situation that's problematic for the office, flag it earlier the better to your comms team and to the chief of staff and the state director, to just kind of, so it's in the back of the mind. And so we as comms people can develop that sort of reactive messaging if necessary. It's important to know where the constituent's from, because we have relationships with the media in that area, the local papers. We can, if this is going to be a potentially really bad thing, we can have conversations on background or off the record just to help the journalists or the editors or anybody at the paper. Sometimes with some smaller papers, it's just one person. But having those conversations on background or off the record so that they understand the 10,000 foot, display of what this issue is, the dynamics at play, and some of the history, without discussing the constituent in particular, because there are privacy related issues. But if it is a grant program, you can have conversations just about the grant program. If someone's having an issue with that, that's all public. It's part of legislation. I would also simply recommend that people understand, and this isn't just for caseworkers, it's for the comms team, it's for the whole office. Sometimes it's just going to happen. And you have to trust that your caseworkers who do this day in and day out did the best that they could. So many of these decisions are outside of your hands, and you can feel kind of hamstrung in a way because you've seen positive resolutions on so many cases. You know that your office can produce fantastic results. But again, you can't do too much proactively, right? Because of privacy. So whatever the public finds out about this particular case is going to be exclusively from the constituent. So they're going to say what they're going to say. Number one, because they're the only ones who are allowed to say it. Number two, they've probably been priming this for a while. And, I hate to say you win some, you lose some, but honestly, you win many, and the losses are just so few that you can't spend time stressing about it, because you will have another case to work. There's always another federal agency or program to work with or to get results for a constituent on. If it seems appropriate, and you should have a conversation with your chief of staff and district director and the caseworker, if it seems appropriate, you can have the member themselves call the constituent. That's always an option. I think a lot of times just the impression of a member of Congress personally calling you is enough to put out a fire, at least. Maybe it doesn't change the situation. Maybe it doesn't make the constituent terribly less angry, but maybe it prevents them from writing a letter to the editor or something like that. That's another option in the toolkit. Really, you have to feel out the situation, and it's going to be different for everybody. And there are laws at play that prevent us from doing certain things. But the one thing you can absolutely do and always be ready for is that collaborative environment. And that's why it's critical to not get siloed in DC, in the DC office, to always be reaching out to the district, because they're the ones who live there. They know what's going on every day. It may seem simple to us, drive down the road to the VA office and just have the constituent go in there. It's not that easy. And that's why they're just mutual respect and understanding and collaboration helps you navigate these situations.
Definitely. And I'd like to say how comforting that is, and just that reminder of you can't win them all. And this is a part of working in Congress. How comforting that is, I'm sure, to a lot of caseworkers out there. Definitely something I wish I'd heard more when I was a caseworker, but that's super helpful. And then you mentioned just kind of understanding the full breadth of the toolkit for working with constituents, whether they're angry or happy about your team or whatever it may be. And I know in some very, very limited circumstances, but occasionally the media is a casework tool that's available to caseworkers and to offices. Do you have any advice for caseworkers who are, again, their ledge teams were kind of thinking, I've exhausted the rest of my toolkit. When would it be appropriate to talk about pitching a media story about something casework related?
I think so. I absolutely agree. The media is a great tool for casework, and you can approach this in different ways. You can have you can identify a handful of constituents who are willing to go on the record, or at least on background, and just discuss the positive outcomes from the casework experience. Of course, if it's a traditional sort of story, there's always the chance that journalist may seek out constituents who didn't have a favorable experience, who are also willing to go on the record to provide balance to the piece. Work closely with any reporter that is reaching out. Be mindful of what you can share. That's sort of the direct way. I like to also use op-eds as a way to promote casework. Have the member themselves write something on the op-ed page about what their office offers. Highlight constituents who have agreed to that testimonial, who want to be part of it, what was done. Make a point to highlight constituents who the community knows probably never voted for that member or never will, but there's that casework respect there, where they're at least satisfied with the service they got. They know the staff are there for them if they ever need, and they spread the positive word, at least about the casework. So there's two routes in the media in that regard: the actual pitching a piece method, and then the op-ed method, and that kind of gives you a little bit more control over the messaging, of course. But one other thing about that method is you can kind of tailor it to individual communities. Just in the smaller papers, I might, when I worked for Congressman Young, I might have submitted an op-ed to the Anchorage Daily News, the biggest paper in the state, to talk about a broader issue like infrastructure, but maybe to the Sitka Sentinel or the Nome Nugget, it's 3 paragraphs on what our office does as an op-ed. You can seek approval from the Communication Standards Commission for official ads in papers, radio ads, television even, and that's a budgetary conversation with your chief of staff and district director probably, but it's another option for you to use the media, and you really can involve the staff, because one of the most popular things to do is mobile office hours. And that may be a standalone mobile office hour where it's just your office set up at a table at the rec center, inviting people to give their opinions or to come get help with the Social Security Administration. Or you may be partnering with organizations in the district. Maybe it's a county fair or a Kiwanis meeting or something like that, or just the first day of school somewhere. And your office wants to offer constituent services. There are a lot of folks out there in the media who would love to cover that, and that's easy to do because you're just covering the service offerings itself. You don't have to worry about privacy because you're not bringing in constituents. You're just saying, this is what we do. We want you to come talk to us. That simple messaging, getting it out there, can really change the game for a lot of constituents and also a lot of offices.
I really appreciate those tips. And just to go back to what you were saying about the winning and losing reassurance, I personally, you'd stay up at night worrying about that one case. I would often, when I had that feeling that it was going to go south, just loop in our press person. Even he didn't reply, but I knew that he would have my back should the opportunity arise for that person to get in touch with the media. And I think that caseworkers are dealing with so many issues and so much stress that knowing that they have that support from the press team can be really beneficial. So kudos to you on that. And we're just curious to think about in an office where there isn't that kind of really positive relationship, either because of distance or history or, competing priorities. What can the casework folks do to try to establish and build that positive relationship with the comms team that maybe isn't as familiar with casework?
Sure. We, as an office, we tried to do DC district staff meetings once a year. That's a really critical thing. There is something to be said for just proximity, even for just 1 or 2 days. It helps with keeping communication open. If caseworkers have perhaps maybe there's a new communications person or team in the office. If caseworkers had something that they thought has worked in the past, or maybe they have an idea that they think would work going forward, when somebody new comes on board, that's the best time to address those things, because that's your time to reevaluate, to recalibrate, to figure out where you're going from here, what you want to do differently, where your opportunities lie. So that's crucially important. I think communications people tend to have a bias towards storytelling. So if you get under the skin of a comms person from the angle of what we're doing here is important, it's really good for people, it's helping people, real people who we represent, and sort of making that case for telling the story, or spreading the word. There really is no suggestion. If caseworker came to me with their ideas, I would hope that I would hear them out, because I don't know what I don't know. And so many of my successes from a communication standpoint on the Hill were from situations that I learned from other comms people and just tailored to Alaska and to Congressman Young, and maybe some tweaks here and there. But just like everybody else, we don't know what we don't know. And we definitely don't know the day-to-day goings on in the district, especially if we're not from there, especially if we haven't visited in a while. And that's why we need the eyes and ears on the ground, so that we can be in DC, the bullhorn that gets them credit for what caseworkers do, that spreads the word about what the member can do, and that tells a story of how somebody was positively affected. And just talk. That's the best advice I have is, we are in Congressman Young's office, we truly were one team. And that's why I think there was such a family dynamic to some degree. And I saw the benefit to that, to just getting casework, not just closed out, but just like, even after the congressman passed away, the final few months, just casework was the thing that drove us. And that was because we could all connect and agree on it.
That's awesome.
Great.
I think what a challenge to caseworkers and casework managers who are thinking about this, just to not be shy. And caseworkers do incredible work. This is the whole foundation of this entire series, this entire project from the POPVOX Foundation, just to highlight amazing work, not be shy about telling those stories, because they are so important.
Absolutely.
I'm going to shift us a little bit, and Zach, you seamlessly transitioned us over there, because Zach, you and Katherine have both worked in, as you said, some offices. You've both been part of the process of closing up an office for an absolute titan of a member of Congress with an incredibly long and distinguished career, with just unbelievable accomplishments. With the passing of Rep. Don Young, who was Dean of the House, and then Senator Leahy, who was President Pro Tem of the Senate. And I know the process of closing up that office and kind of coming to terms with the end of that career is not easy, even though it can be really rewarding to kind of reflect back on that legacy of service. And there's casework and comms angles to all of that. So I'd love to hear from both of you, but Zach, maybe you could kick us off. You just talk a little bit about, you've touched on this, but how did casework play a role in kind of telling that final story for Mr. Young?
Sure. So, closing down the office, especially the congressman's personal office, which was square footage wise, I think the biggest, it was the biggest member office in the House buildings, office buildings themselves. And sheer square footage means there are just knickknacks and tchotchkes and trinkets.
Was there a bear? Am I remembering a bear?
There was a bear. You would walk in and there was literally a bear right on the wall. There was a piece of the pipeline somewhere. There was walrus tusks somewhere else. There was so much. And you start closing down the office and you're thinking to yourself, wow, first of all, the implications for my own life and career, that's one thing. That's, I guess, the immediate thing because I need to be employed. But then you start to think 50 years of all of these things, which look like nothing, to an outsider, little might be a figurine or a can of smoked salmon. The vast majority of these trinkets that were hanging around his office were just from casework, from some group coming in and presenting an award or for casework that had happened, or some organization with a certificate. There was just so much of the memorabilia on the wall was casework related that you felt like casework was driving closing down the office. I mean, you almost felt like, this was a member who, before the bipartisan infrastructure bill, had been responsible for safety loo. He named after his first wife, the transportation bill in 2005. That's a tremendous legislative accomplishment. He'd love to talk about the Magnuson-Stevens Act and the pipeline. But like I said before, he was most proud of constituent services. And I think that was clear closing down the office, because there was just one constituent service award or recognition after the other. And there was just a story behind everything. He'd come back from trips that he'd take sometimes, and he'd just talk about how he'd be on the North Slope and how cold it was. And you'd hear all these stories of the tundra and wild animals. And then you come to find out that he's in that village because there was a casework reason for him to be there. And just, telling the story and closing the book and looking back, seeing how much was casework related was awesome, because I always took the congressman at his word that casework was his favorite part of the job, but now it was real to me because I could look back and I could see everything. The congressman had the receipts. He did the casework. And in the early days, he was probably doing to some degree the casework. So it was just a super incredible time and really, sad but fortunate. I felt so fortunate to be there, to be helping out with my team. The Congressman Young's final staff, we call ourselves. We worked so well together, and we had this dynamic that I talked about before. That it was, again, it was sad, but it was like celebratory. We'd pack boxes and we'd say, "Oh, here's a birthday card from Bill Clinton and George Bush. That's pretty cool. All right, next thing." And it was just, every 5 seconds, something new to discover in closing down this office. And it was just a wonderful time. And it was great to really actualize casework being his legacy.
That's amazing. I can only imagine what it felt like to be part of that. And there's something there. I mean, Congress's approval ratings are not great, but there's something really powerful in reflecting on what one man was able to get done for his constituents over that long period of time. That's amazing. And Katherine, I know you also had a monumental logistical challenge in helping Senator Leahy conclude his office, but can you speak a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so much of what you just said, Zach, really resonates and touches my heart in a different way, with the circumstances of Congressman Young passing, whereas Senator Leahy, made the difficult decision to walk out of the building after 48 years, which you know, in the year after he announced, really came to strike me as just an incredibly courageous thing. And so I felt it a real privilege to be able to be with him till the last day. As well, there was a tractor trailer of items and memorabilia and papers that came up from DC to Vermont, and our staff, worked for months to pack up all that evidence of the work that was done around the state. Commemorative plates from the land trust and all of that. I think on the casework end, I think what was special was there were a number of retrospectives done by the media, and you would hear people talk about their own personal experiences, including the media. Our local Vermont Public Radio longtime call-in host talked about how he had helped her husband get his visa. So that kind of personal touch. And then on that last call-in show, I remember hearing a number of constituents call and talk about the time that Senator Leahy called them when their father died, or their staff also, all had those stories. So I think it really goes to the earned media approach of allowing people to tell their own stories, but that the staff as a team really did facilitate that. One of the as a longtime photographer, Senator Leahy was really prided himself on getting pictures out to folks that would be taken at events, which was quite arduous, complicated process, but resulted in virtually everyone in Vermont having a picture of themselves with Senator Leahy on their refrigerator, and that really is meaningful. And the folks who would tell you that 30 years ago you helped them save their home. So it really goes to show that while the big legislative accomplishments and the international work and all the important legacy are absolutely a legacy, but what people remember is how you made them feel, and I think was privileged to be a part of that.
That's amazing, and I feel incredibly privileged to get to talk to both of you about that experience. What an incredible piece of serving in Congress and thinking about public service. Zack, this has been absolutely delightful. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experience. What a fabulous case study to hear about how you did this work in the young office. Is there anything I've forgotten to ask you? Any last pieces of wisdom shared with caseworkers?
I was just laughing at Katherine's story just now about Senator Leahy being on everyone's fridge. When my first day in Congressman Young's office, I learned that when he would take meetings, didn't matter if they were individual constituents or big groups, the first thing that would happen was everybody would take a photo. While the meeting was going on, we had a staff member print the photos on photo paper for every attendee, and in the middle of the meeting, hand over the photos and a Sharpie to the congressman, and he'd sit in the meeting talking, autographing them, best wishes, Don Young. And it's really true, folks. I got to tell you, you might think people will find it silly, but if you get your boss's face on their refrigerators, they're going to talk about it.
That's amazing. I'm blown away. Katherine, you mentioned the logistical challenge of this. I'm blown away by just the sheer staff having it togetherness to be able to do that for both of your offices.
Yeah, that's a brilliant alternative. We started also letting people take their own selfies. So things did change over in that last little bit of time to expedite things. Amazing.
That's awesome. Again, Zack, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. This is really wonderful. Like I said, this is a topic that I think caseworkers are really trying to figure out and wrap their heads around, and it's something that's changing so quickly. So it's so helpful kind of have your insight, and again, the work that you did in the Young office as a starting point to think through how can this be better? How can this be easier for caseworkers? We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you, for having me. This was awesome. And I'm wishing all the caseworkers out there all the best, especially as summer passport season heats up and things get down to the wire.
And it sounds like it's fun out there. And then for
Thanks
folks
so
joining
much,
us,
Anne.
thank you, thank you, thank you. As a reminder for folks, suggestions, comments, questions, ideas for other webinars can either go in the question box on Legidash or shoot us an email at casework@popvox.org, and we will do our best to get right back to you. Y'all, thank you again and enjoy the rest of your Friday.